Hello, good morning, good day, good evening to all of you around the world. This is the fourth and final episode of the 16th MCC. We ran it as a virtual event in 2020. And this is going to be a session that will be recorded and it will be available for you later on. Your microphone will be automatically muted. If you have any questions, please post them to the right of your screen. Usually a panel appears there and you can send your questions. And we will run a short poll at the beginning of the webinar. We have together with us our Assistant General Counsel on antitrust issues, Daniel Cantor. He has been with us throughout the series, and he will be screening the questions to ensure that they pass the IATA's antitrust competition law guidelines. The MCC has been a key conference for us. It's an annual event that runs every September. It gathers about 170 or more people around the world as a face-to-face conference. This year we have well over that number. Only in attendance we have about 250 people in every episode. And you can learn more about the data collection and maintenance costs on the link. The slides will be provided to you at the end of the webinar or a little bit after. And also at the end of the presentation, you will find a slide with various links and for IATA resources about the COVID. And we will have Q&A sessions as you see on the next slide. So the previous episodes, very quickly, we addressed the economic context and the forecast, and a number of airlines provided us with their parking and storage strategies. We discussed about transporting cargo in the passenger cabin, aircraft disinfection, and fuel testing and biocides in the second episode. And in the third episode, we discussed about the aircraft leasing and the MRO market trends. All the episodes can be found on the IATA's website, as you see on the slide that will be available to you. So the agenda of this episode is the topics are the Used Serviceable Market, the USM, Used Serviceable Materials Market. We will have our opening keynote presentation from GA Telesis, followed by presentation by Aerodynamic Advisory and by VAS Aeroservices. We'll provide a very short presentation about the incidents clearance statement that we have agreed with the leasing community, the airlines and the leasing community. And then we will be discussing about optimizing consumable stocks. And we will finally present you with a platform on the IATA website. We call it the MRO SmartHub. Just to give you an idea about the market, what it is today. In April, we experienced most of the grounded aircraft, about 65% of a fleet of about 30,000 aircraft from small turboprops and up, 40 plus seaters, up to the big A380s. And now by the end of August, 34% of the fleet was grounded. So we see aircraft returning back, although the utilization, it was in the lowest in April, about 5 hours a day. Now it's picking up, but still has not reached the levels that were pre-COVID. And with this, it's time for our first poll. So please answer. This is something that we run in every webinar that we have done at IATA in this area. So please let us know what is your expectation about the demand for travel. When do you think that the demand will be back to the 2019 levels? And you have about 1 minute before we show you the results. If you can
Chris, I'm sorry. It looks like there was a
glitch.
Technical issue on the, and I cannot go back to the. I will try to enter it again, and maybe we can do the poll again at the end of the webinar if we have time. I'm so sorry about that.
Okay, so let's move on. If we can have the next slide. Okay, so these are our speakers for the day. So Abdul Moaberi, he's the president and CEO of GI Telesis. We have Jonas Marby, who is the principal with the Aerodynamic Advisory. Tommy Hughes, the president and CEO of VAS Aeroservices, and they will be discussing on the USM, all three of them. Then followed by Jens Bjarnason, SVP Corporate Affairs for Iceland Air, and previously he was the SVP for Tech Ops. And finally, Gareth Harris from IATA, who is the Product Manager and Business Development for the MRO SmartHub. And with this, let me quickly pass it on to Abdul. Thanks, Abdul, for being with us today and providing your insight on this MCC 4th episode. All yours. Thanks.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I've got a lot to cover this morning, so I'm going to go through things rather quickly to stay on track, but you have my email address. If you have any questions or anything to talk about, please feel free to send me an email. I'm pleased to be on this panel with my distinguished colleagues to talk about these unprecedented times in the USM sector. So can you go to the first slide, please? So just a quick snapshot of GA Telesis and our distribution. We are in 5 distinct businesses: components, what we call our Flight Solutions Group, which covers components, GSE tooling, logistics. We have distribution centers on 5 continents. And on some continents, we have more than one. Leasing and asset management throughout the world, MRO services, again, throughout the world. And our newest business, our technology group, has people throughout the world developing the technologies that we use. GA Telesis shareholders include myself as the founder, but also Tokyo Century Corporation, who owns Aviation Capital Group wholly, as well as All Nippon Airlines. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd start off with an evolution of the USM market. I've been in this business for quite a long time and moved between parts and leasing and MRO throughout my career. So I wanted to just give a snapshot of where we were and where we're going. The early area, the business has been around for about 75 years. I call the opportunist era the first era. That's the era where USM suppliers were out there looking for an aircraft that they could disassemble. There were few of them. There was just a few operators. The parts weren't widely accepted by the airlines because they gravitated towards the OEMs, and the whole sector was called the surplus parts market. That in the early 1990s transformed into what I call the sector expertise era, where many new companies emerged, really coming out of the pioneers. If you look at just the sheer number of companies that came out of AAR with their former employees, it's in the dozens. OEMs started to take notice of what they called the surplus market, and some of the OEMs jumped in early. Guys like GE, Pratt & Whitney came in the early 90s. And more airlines started integrating used serviceable material or surplus parts into their maintenance philosophies. Sort of right after 2000, the sophistication era started. The USM market was born. It got away from the word surplus parts, and used serviceable material became the new thing, and money started to pour into the industry. Sophisticated companies emerged. They were developed from scratch, like mine, and the USM market was born. Technologies were developed to help airlines manage USM. As you know, the amount of software around helping airlines manage through their USM is unparalleled at this point, and almost every airline in the world has adopted a used serviceable material strategy, and almost every OEM in the world is now in the USM market, which is a big differentiator from decades past. Going forward, sort of 2020 going forward, we think the smart data era is starting. That's going to be a result of the unprecedented amounts of inventory that are available in the market that are coming from all the aircraft that will be permanently retired. Buying decisions are going to be made via algorithmic adaptation models that are developed, and I think Jens is going to talk to you a little bit about what they're doing there. And then there'll be a constant drive towards optimization, and this will result in a need for less inventory globally. Something we've been saying for years, and we're actually have a strategy around that. Next slide, please. So let's take a look behind the scenes. And in this, I'm purposefully not including aircraft like the MD-80s, the classic 737s, the 340s, the 380s, the CRJs, because those were aircraft that were sort of in a distress scenario prior to COVID-19. Next slide. So just looking at the parked aircraft that might be parted out due to a lack of demand. This is a scope of all the parked or the parked aircraft that have a potential for being parted out. The two Airbus models that I'm covering here, the 320 and 330, and then the Boeing is the 737 all the way through the 787. Now, we looked through and we went aircraft by aircraft and looked at which aircraft we thought would be parted out or potentially parted out over the next number of years as a result of COVID-19. And what's important to note here is that as it relates to the engines, you know, for every number here, it's times at least times two. On some aircraft, it's more, but on these, it's times two because there's two engines on every aircraft. Can you go to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Hello, next slide. Next slide, please.
Looks like we're having another technical issue.
Okay.
I'm on the next slide, but it doesn't show for the moment. Sorry.
Okay. Well, why don't I just jump to my screen? I'll jump to my screen and keep talking to stay on track, and then you can catch up when we do. So digging deeper into the, let me just move this over here. Thank you. So digging deeper into these aircraft, looking at the aircraft that are sort of older than 17 years old, we view that maintenance cycles will drive what the resulting factor will be a part out. That means that, you know, what maintenance condition will there be that will potentially cause an aircraft to be parted out. So there is some protection on things like the A330, which has freighter. Oh, there we go. The A330, which makes a great freighter, but adoption has been slow, and it's been slow because historically the A330 as an aircraft was too expensive, and when you added the ensuing cost of conversion, the operating cost didn't work. The 777-200s and 300s, from our perspective, will vastly go to part out and thus saturate the market for the foreseeable future with USM. The 73, the 75, and the 76 have some level of protection because they are freighter candidates, and we're all seeing the freighter boom as it relates to e-commerce. But digging down even deeper into these red boxes represent what we think are aircraft that will be prematurely parted out in the coming future and potentially flood the market with USM. Next slide, please. So what's happening in the market today? Next slide, please. So the engine USM market will definitely feel the impact. The down cycle is seeing enormous pressure on CFM56, V2500, RB211s, Trent 7 and 800s, Pratt 4000s across the CF680, C and E, and the GE90. Engines. The sheer amount of green time that is coming available is going to cause maintenance deferments on certain models that will last up to 4 years. Post green time, most of those engines will not be overhauled, but rather be disassembled, and the USM will be used as an alternative to new parts and thus impacting the engine OEMs. The COVID-19 cycle is somewhat different than other industry cycles, whereby there will be newer aircraft that are retired prematurely in this cycle, thus putting the GE90-115B, the GE-NX, the GP7000, and Trent 900 and 1000 engines in the crosshairs. While there's little to no part-out market for these new technology engines above, the availability of green time will impact the engine MROs and OEMs as shop visits are deferred into the future. And due to the available significant amounts of USM, it is more economically feasible for airlines and owners to short build engines, thus impacting MROs and OEMs. Next slide, please. The airframe impact today is and has always been under constant pressure. There's tremendous pressure on existing pooling and cost per hour models as airlines are moving towards and favoring a pay-as-you-go consumption model. Airlines are parting out their own airframes to harvest the key components that they consume and either sell, consign, or scrap the remaining parts. Airlines are burning green time on major components like APUs and landing gear before consuming replacement parts or performing maintenance. Airlines are cannibalizing parked and stored aircraft before buying parts, new or USM. With many OEMs in the USM market, it's hard for them to differentiate the benefits between new and USM. Airlines are operating their newest, most maintenance-ready aircraft and parking and storing aircraft that are in need of maintenance or major parts. And with the amount of USM available, the market prices are becoming commoditized more than ever before COVID-19, and therefore values are very volatile. Can you move to the next slide, please? And this is gravitating towards what we'll call a tiering system among the USM suppliers. Airlines are and will continue to gravitate towards larger suppliers because of their ability to maintain the inventory levels sufficient to support their operations. Airlines will focus on suppliers capable of offering integrated services beyond just providing parts. Airlines will be drawn to USM providers that can provide financial structures around new and USM inventory. And airlines will look at suppliers to provide financial flexibility for the foreseeable future, and this will take balance sheet strength that the larger Tier 1 suppliers will have. Next slide, please. So what will happen next? Next slide, please. Inventory risk will shift. Airlines will favor a model whereby the inventory that supports them does not reside on their balance sheet. Now, if you look back in history, if you go back to when I started in this business, maybe 5 to 10% of the world's aircraft fleets were leased. And today, that number is in excess of 50% of the aircraft is leased. Sometime in the 1990s, this also migrated towards engines. And the spare engines of the world are now also about 40% leased. This is migrating to inventory. GA is the largest inventory lessor in the world with close to $500 million in inventory on lease to airlines around the world. And we think that's going to be the model going forward where the inventory is on the balance sheet of companies like GA as opposed to the airlines. Next slide, please. So the role of USM in the industry restarts. So when the market starts to recover and move back, where are we going to go? We think OEMs are going to try to play a more active role in the USM market to attempt to capture the displacement of revenue that they lose from selling new parts. We think USM suppliers will become more of a competitor to OEM new products just because of the sheer volume of parts that are going to be available in the marketplace. And we think MROs will have to adopt an inventory-rich model to support the airlines. Next slide, please. So looking at the two various sectors, the engine and the airframe, we think that the engine USM will hold value for core fleet engines. That's not every engine. This is core fleet, 320, 737, 7576 engines because of cargo, the 320, the 330 models. as well as the E-jets. We think the USM will be used as a mechanism to drive cost savings for engine operators and owners. We think this will ease the advantage that the OEMs have because currently they control the supply chain for these core engine types, and that will go away just by the sheer volume of engines that will be disassembled. It will have an increased MRO effect for some due to the affordability of short engine builds. So what is a short engine build? So today, because of a lack of availability of used serviceable LLPs, you're forced to build an engine to whatever the lowest cycle LLP you can get, and a lot of times that's new. So in this case, you can build 7, 8, 9,000 cycle engines, especially like CFMs or Vs, because those parts are available and it's more economical. And the OEMs that have the USM businesses will potentially have a conundrum. What do they do to balance the USM that they promote in their own businesses against the new parts that they also manufacture? On the airframe side, we think this will become a very volatile and difficult market. While there's going to be thousands of core aircraft flying, the sheer number of available airframe parts will have an impact on pricing for years to come. Airlines will be forced to part out some of their own aircraft because there's just not going to be enough buyers to buy the number of aircraft that are coming available to the market. And airlines will consume their own material versus buying. They will harvest the parts off their own aircraft and use those as a deferment to buying. And airlines will prefer not to own inventory. They'll want the airframe parts to be owned by USM providers, OEMs, and also MROs. Next slide, please. So we think the future is digital technologies in USM. The entire replacement part market, be that USM or MRO or OEM, will be technology driven through artificial intelligence. A combination of the aviation expertise and technology are going to create and use the tools from the IoT. Data science will be used for the creation of the AI systems that will be used, and it will be predictive versus reactive. The blockchain system of record is a potential solution that will solve the critical trust component. I'll get more into detail on that in just a few moments. Next slide, please. So inevitably, 4 things that will happen. Decoupling. Since COVID-19, airlines are and will continue decoupling from exclusive programs they have, be that from an OEM or an MRO, in favor of bundled services without an advanced or current pay option. This is going to cause a risk transfer into what we'll say are partnerships. The partnerships, they'll partner with USM suppliers to ensure alignment of objectives, service levels, while also allowing the airline access to the greatest amount of USM in the sector's history. Then the risk mitigation comes through integration, where USM suppliers will play a great role by providing airlines with services integrating USM to MROs and maximizing accessibility while also reducing cost and utilizing their own assets through the entire life cycle. And that will ultimately lead to a data strategy that every airline will have to adopt, where consumption data will be used to manage the entire supply chain and evolve into a strategy linking airlines, OEMs, MROs, and USM providers to use the collective data combined with AI to drive efficiency and cost savings. Next slide, please. So we saw this coming 2 years ago at GA Telesis, and we created a digital technologies group within our organization that has programmers on 3 continents. Our first projects, Blockit, which is done and being introduced, is a financial messaging platform that we originally developed for our industry, but is now being used in a lot of different sectors. SmartSearch perhaps is the one that's most relevant here. It's an aviation blockchain-based system managing records with value capture optimization, transparent data exchange that address the entire life cycle of used serviceable material from birth. Next slide, please. So I want you to ask yourself, what if? What if we were able to create a digital twin in a universal format and use global collaboration to make sure that the system worked? The system would create a global system of records that created everything from back to birth and essentially extinguish the need for non-incident statements. Now, Chris will be very happy to hear that one. And this will be a system that is completely data driven and taking the manual elements out of the aviation industry. Next slide, please. In this case, everyone benefits: airlines, airline operators, leasing companies, OEMs, airframers, and engine OEMs, MROs, the aftermarket, and the aviation authorities. The data transforms and goes from the operator to everybody anonymously. Next slide, please. So what does the future look like? I want you to imagine an industry where we build the largest network of data. Timely information is delivered safely. Service bulletins, ADs, anything that the regulatory authorities want to provide. Instant credibility by ensuring that all the information is complied with the airline's requirements. Identification of rogue parts I'm not talking about SUPs, but rather parts that consistently have an issue, and collaboration through better troubleshooting, sharing troubleshooting information from airline to airline to allow faster turnarounds on maintenance issue. The only limitation here is what we can imagine. It's putting together all the things we wish we had into one software platform. Next slide, please. So it's time, from our perspective, for transformation. We want to build reliability, increase asset value, ensure that safety and efficiency continue. And we want to do this with respecting the privacy and the intellectual property of each OEM, each USM provider, each MRO, and each airline especially. Next slide, please. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you. I'll look forward to any questions that you might have at the end. I'll turn it back over to you all. Hopefully I stayed on time.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much, Abdul. We'll take questions at the end. So please use your screen to type in the questions that you may have for Abdul and the other speakers. And let's go. Apologies for the technical glitches. Let's go continue our webinar with Jonas Merby from Aerodynamic Advisory. He will talk to us about the evolution of the USM market. All yours, Jonas. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris and Geraldine, for allowing me to speak here. And thank you, Abdul, for a fantastic first presentation. I hope I can match this with some complementary perspectives. I think overall, we're pretty much in line. We have, as a small company, we have looked deeply into this matter of how the coronavirus impacts the aviation and aerospace value chains over the past 6 months. And so you'll see some outputs from our work here. Just to start on the airline side, the reality that airlines are living in, we looked at travel scenarios which we've built over time here and how we think travel will develop. We've been quite pessimistic along the way in terms of the aviation's ability to recover, and our nominal scenario that we've built, which is the one we believe most in, is where we see traffic returning in the end of 2023. So 2024 will be the first year where we'd be back to 2019 levels. And you see the gray line, which is the forecast that we had, that was kind of the base level. And we basically don't see aviation recovering to that growth path that it was on. The key determinant here is obviously the vaccine, and we have assumed that a vaccine starts to get introduced in the beginning of next year, then deployed over the coming 6 to 12 months. But it's not a silver bullet. It will take a number of years for the effect to take place and for the coronavirus to not be the primary aspect that aviation is talking about. So we see that there are potential upsides in our forecast, especially if you can get a good testing system implemented that would help international traffic. But we see actually a greater risk for a downside to this scenario. So that's on the airline side. How does that impact the MRO market? Well, you can see that on the next slide. So we have kind of modeled how the traffic impacts MRO and not only traffic, but also airline cash conservation methods, engine green time management of landing gears and APUs, the pushing of discretionary expenditures such as modification and so on. And as you see kind of the indexed market sizes here. There is a significant drop in this year, especially for engine MRO, component MRO, and modifications for those reasons that I just discussed. So a significant drop, more drop than actual airline traffic. The other thing is that we don't expect a significant recovery in 2021, simply because traffic will start to recover more towards the second half of 2021. Plus, you have this impact of green time engines that you can utilize and so on, which means that the real recovery is in 2022. And we saw on the airline side, we know airlines are hurting, but if you look at this from a supplier side, this is what the component OEMs are seeing, and this is MRO expenditures. If you look at part expenditures, they are down 60 to 80%, depending on which component OEM you ask. And combining the reduction in production rates with the reduction in aftermarket revenues makes this a really critical situation for many players in the aftermarket. So how does this impact retirements, part outs, USM? Well, let's take a look at retirements on the next page. So you see the purple bar to the left that showed the number of retirements we saw in 2019, and we have for a long time been expecting an increase in the number of retirements simply due to the demographics of the fleet. In our nominal scenario here, or in any of these scenarios, we think that the retirements will speed up. This crisis will speed up and accentuate the retirements wave. So there will be more retirements and they will become earlier. I think this year, thus far, airlines have announced some 1,300 retirements thus far. We think there are still some major fleet decisions to be done, but as I'll explain later, those decisions will be made next year and the year after as well. Now, retirement doesn't mean part out necessarily, and we think if we go to the next page, we think that the market for USM and part outs will actually go in phases. We see 3 phases in which airlines are behaving. We're still kind of in the first phase, which we call the airline survival phase, where they're basically treading water. They have taken decisions on headcounts and so on in order to reduce the fixed costs right now. They're burning inventory, minimizing any MRO expenditure they can, but we haven't seen a large number of part outs because it's reasonably cheap to keep airplanes parked and stored, and that will position airlines better for a comeback. And besides, asset values are so low so that it's not in anyone's interest to try to get these assets off their books. However, we're kind of entering into a phase 2, which we really will kind of take off once a vaccine is approved and can provide some kind of a bit more certainty about the recovery. And that is a situation where we suddenly have a potential recovery coming when airlines can take bigger fleet decisions and really make a plan out of this. That will allow them to downsize their fleet. They can optimize the use of the fleet that they want to continue with, and optimize the use of the fleet that they may want to get rid of, and optimize the use of engine green time and so on. You'll see the residual values recovering, especially towards the latter part of next year, which we think towards the end of this period. And then we enter into phase 3 when traffic is really starting to recover. That is when you suddenly have demand for parts again. Airlines will be, and MRO shops will be restocking their inventories. That is suddenly when asset values will rise and you see greater economies in part outs. So if we look on the next page, this page looks at retirements and part outs that we expect. And as you see, the retirements are really front-loaded, taking place over the coming few years here, whereas the number of part outs will actually kind of reach higher levels first in 2023. So demand starts returning in 2022. We think there is capacity out there. It'll take a little bit of time for capacity to grow to where it needs to be, simply because they're taking care of stored aircraft in various places at the moment. So to make room for part out capacity and so on, it'll take a little time to adjust, and then we'll reach, you know, a high number of part outs in the years 2023 and onwards. Could it be more part outs than this? Yes, but as Abdul was mentioning, you may have a pretty volatile situation in some of those markets, Airframe USM, where the supply-demand situation really will dictate what are the economics in these part outs, because you may have a complete overflow of parts into some markets, which will affect those asset prices. Next page. Another factor in this is something, as Abdul talked about earlier, the USM market has gone in phases, and early, you know, in the decade of the 1990s, the key supply of used parts came from excess airline inventories or excess shop inventories. And then as you went into the sophistication phase, which I think you called it, Abdul, where the USM industry, the teardown industry, really got institutionalized, the OEMs getting into this space, suddenly it was aircraft retirements that were the key drivers of supply of these parts. Well, given where we are as an industry with expected downsizing of the number of airlines, bankruptcies along the way, we will see more of these excess inventories being sold into the market, and that will impact kind of the mix of parts that are sold, because from in a part out, of course, part out provider starts with looking at the expensive parts, and as you go towards the lower unit prices, they're typically not worth as much as a part of their total sale. Whereas from an airline perspective, those cheaper parts can still be of great interest, and these inventories being sold off from bankruptcies and so on will contain more of those kind of consumable and repairable type parts as well, that will become a part of the mix. Another factor that's worth mentioning in this as well is what you can see on the next page, and I think Abdul, you alluded a little bit to this, which is the market for integrated programs. So the power by the hour programs provided by the Lufthansa Technics and SR Technics of the world, even the Boeings and Airbuses of the world have gone into this space. As you can see in the chart to the left here, it was a small portion of the market back in the 90s, but it has really grown steadily over the past 2 decades and was almost half of the component MRO market back in 2018. They were good for the airline point of view. It really lowered the barrier to entry for an airline, because they could just tap into the supplier's pool and didn't have to invest in all these assets. And from the supplier point of view, these types of contracts with airlines provided a good predictable revenue for years to come, typically in 5-year or even 10-year contracts. So it was good for both types of players in a certain environment where traffic, we've been in a certain environment for a pretty long time where traffic has grown steadily. Now this has all changed, and we're into a much more uncertain environment where airlines are in a much greater need of flexibility. They are not willing to sign up for liabilities for fixed payments per month. For example, they don't even know how much they will be operating or which aircraft they will prefer to operate. Same from the supply side. To make any large investment to cover an airline that you may not be sure can operate within 2-3 years, that is of course a big risk in that as well. So, and on top of that, you will have this big substitution potential from USM on the side. So why would an airline pay a power by the hour fee of some $70, $80 per hour when there is cheap USM available on the market? So that will basically, we think that the airlines are in great need for more flexibility here. So the integrators, they will need to adapt their value propositions. You've actually seen some integrators declaring that they're exiting this market. SR Technics announced this about a month back. And then also you'll see more competition from big USM players, such as the ones we have on our panel here today. And the next slide actually shows an interesting proof of that, you can say. We did a survey with the Aviation Suppliers Association earlier this summer, and we asked the respondents to basically foresee what the revenue would be for various maintenance revenue streams over the coming few years. And the USM players were actually relatively bullish. And as you see, they expect, the large USM players expect the market to be back at where it was already in 2022. And so I think that the sense here is that large USM players can feel pretty bullish in this environment. Interestingly, on the side note, the market share for PMA in this environment is expected to go down. So that's what we had from our end. I think again, this downturn will stay with us for a while. There will be a part out wave, but it will be slightly delayed. There will be new needs among airlines to be well supported, but in a more flexible manner, and that will create need for change in the supply base. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonas. Very interesting presentation and for your insights. And quickly, let's pass on to Tommy Hughes, President and CEO of VAS Aeroservices. So Tommy, all yours. Thanks for participating.
No, it's great. Thank you, Chris. And appreciate Abdul and Jonas's comments and presentation. Lot of familiarity and consistency across what I'm seeing as well. I do appreciate Jonas's bullish comments. I don't feel too bullish today, but I like the proactive view going forward, and I do agree. And so, as some of my slides get into very similar depiction of the aftermarket, and like I said, I think first two presenters did a very good job of stating that across. Try to demonstrate and show some differences, or maybe from an airline's point of view, from dialogues that I've had and so on, of some of the hurdles and what we're trying to do to help provide some resolution towards some of those hurdles. So next slide. So the quick marketing slide, VAS Aeroservices at a glance. 40-year-old company, been in this business a long time. My background came from the airline side with Delta Airlines and ventured into the aftermarket. We're a leading provider in the aftermarket space for aftermarket used material, as well as new production excess or just new material excess. We're about 50-50 on the engine side from a material standpoint, landscape, as well as from an engine side. I would say that the majority of our revenue activity today comes from the facilitation of monetizing value through other people's assets. Simple terms is over half of our revenue actually comes from consignments. So over the years, we've built a large digital play with transparency and facilitating visibility to our partners, even connecting sites together and showing transparency with material and so on. And a lot of what Abdul described, yes, very similar visions here. I think we've incorporated that and seen that vision quite a few years back. Next slide. So if you look at the COVID-19 crisis, unlike past major events, and I told one of my buddies, last year when we were bragging about the bonus checks from an airline projection. Look, we go through this every 7 or 8 years. I didn't expect the impact that we've seen through this crisis. This has been the worst that I've lived through, but there has been something common with the ups and downs of our industry, and we're facing that today. Significant reductions in passenger travel. In April, we started measuring kind of TSA just in North America impacts, and we saw travel go from 2.5 million a day from a passenger aspect to 120,000. That has gradually creeped up from a positive view, and we're seeing 600,000 to 700,000 people a day from a travel, which is an indicator. We also saw China and Asia groups kind of recover quicker than the United States, so we're positively optimistic that will continue going forward. MRO providers have been impacted greatly, based on feeds in the shop. I'm not going to rehash a lot of what was already stated. Here I think people are very much aware that there's a deployment or lack of deployment of parts into the repair aspect of it. There's the ability to go from an airline to the tarmac and take a component off another aircraft instead of repairing or even purchasing that aspect of it, and we'll see that type of behavior. Some airlines more aggressive towards that stance than others, but I do think you'll see that facilitated across the board. Component OEMs will require deeper interface in the USM. That was stated as well. If you look at the OEMs and what they're facing from an aftermarket standpoint, they look at their forecast and business case as they produce and look to sell new product going forward. That is going to be replaced by the fact that there is used service material at a lower cost option available for the airlines. It's also, if you look over the last 4 or 5 years, the acceptance globally associated with USM is, I would say, 90% of the airlines in the world will accept a used product if it's serviced by a satisfied repair facility. So definitely some dynamic changes. But if you look at the business case associated with OEMs, and they started that encroachment into the USM type activity and looking for partners and the way to facilitate and learning that aspect, you will see more of that because their business case has been absorbed by the fact that there's going to be a lot of oversupply associated with the market. Leasing companies that we talked to, and Jonas mentioned this very well, is you're not seeing the part outs today because they're waiting for an optimistic move and not reacting too quick. Immediately, a lot of counterparts and colleagues believe that we would start seeing some aggressive movements from price of assets and so on. We saw some, but not to the level that we expected to see because of the wait and see approach. Book cost impacts, banking, loans associated with the asset values, all those things are kind of stalling that element. Not the fact that they're not parked, but as Jonas mentioned, it's cheaper to store that aircraft than maybe to take a very large write-down hit associated with that if the market is going to proactively recover. So we're watching all those movements today, which aircraft are coming to play as far as an exit strategy and so on, and where do we see the value propositions associated with airframe and engines, with engines being the majority of that focus. Sorry, you go back one. Last one, USM suppliers, significant demand reduction from commercial airlines and MROs. We noticed that aspect of that. It's been mentioned here multiple times, supply and demand and availability, based on flight hours and movement of aircraft. We saw regional aircraft kind of recover faster than narrow bodies and of course the wide bodies being the slowest, but also some interface and increase with cargo operators, which I'll talk about a little bit. Okay, next. World fleet status, mentioned a few times here. As of September, 38%, 13,000 aircraft parked or stored. As mentioned, not all those going into a part out category, but definitely watching to see which ones those fleets kind of re-enter into the market, which ones do go into a tear down capacity and end up funneling additional parts into the market stands. Okay, next. Aircraft projections. Everybody has a different view on this one, so I'll give you mine. You know, the reality aspect of decisions and the individuals we've talked to. There's actually 400 to 500 aircraft that actually will go into the part out that fully retired from that aspect of it. There's as much as 1,500 that could annually enter that landscape, and that's what's being projected. And if you look at some of the aircraft types and where some of those focus, and Abdul mentioned correctly, just kind of moved to this side, you know, A340s, MD-80s, some of the end-of-life aircrafts that don't see some of the second life from a value proposition. But if you look at, my biggest concern from here is not the oversupply aspect of it, is what is the dismantlement capacity associated with the market. That's one thing that has been asked, and if you look to today, if there are 1,500 retirements, is the market capable of even tearing down that many aircraft in the position? I mean, 2 years ago, we tore down A380s, which took 6 months, you know, to disassemble. These were 12-year-old aircraft and kind of a launch leader in that platform, you know, from a USM standpoint. But if you look at all these aircraft and you look at the teardown facilities and the ability and capacity in order to actually reference use USM from those aircraft and so on, what is the capacity? You could see MROs that are doing D-checks today move into a dismantlement category. You could see, you know, airline MROs, you know, doing their own, which you see some of that happening today, but then to a full teardown element. So a lot of those things are key as far as we're looking at what's going to actually reference or facilitate some of that growth. Today, where my focus is in an organization and so on is not as much as the oversupply aspect of it, but the partner alignment and controlling the funnel and the demand base associated with that product. And you're seeing that happen today, and more so through supply program arrangements, through transparency, through connectivity of data, and giving transparency of a product that's sitting on the shelf and so on. So there's one aspect of there could be an oversupply associated with the other aspect of it. Me as an organization, am I aligned in providing the right support activities associated with what I need to make my customer successful and have that product available for that specific airline. So those are some key things that we look at as we go forward into this aspect of it. Okay. Next. You know, one of the large positives that we saw, and I highlighted it here, was the fact that as we saw commercial airlines interrupted the cargo operation, we saw an increase. We saw the likes of a national asking, you know, requesting more lift and putting more aircraft into service. You know, the ones we know, FedEx, UPS, and Amazon and others incorporating more activity and so forth, also for more demand. We saw 767s and specifically 94-inch Pratt Whitney 4000s accelerate from an MRO overhaul stance. So as we've seen some of the difficulties to some of the product landscape and some of the activity, we've also seen a step up from your cargo operators, and we believe that will continue in the near term. Okay, next. Kind of the final slide, and really less about, you know, VAS and more about, and it's mentioned by both speakers today, I think efficiently, is really the digital landscape, you know, from our market. If you look at aerospace and the ability to purchase material today, and you look over the years, I would say the aerospace industry has probably been the slowest to gravitate to the digital world. B2B formats, e-commerce, and so on. There has been the ability all the way up to today, people buying inventory based on a phone call or an email. Relationships are extremely key in our environment. I believe that absolutely will change, and especially from a resource aspect with airlines, and also be forced to develop more of a digital supply chain movement. The race for digital transparency and efficiency is in full gear. There are many wonderful marketplaces out there today, And as Abdul described, building theirs, VAS, we have our solution. There's many others that have theirs. One thing that is fundamentally key is that culturally, from a buying behavior, is also going to have to fundamentally change. And maybe that will with some of the resource constraints associated with airlines, but that has been one of probably the largest undertaking associated with seeing some of that growth has been the cultural buying behavior. And so how do you facilitate that? The other aspect of it, and I know Chris will get into NIS and Trace, if you look at some of the companies trying to enter, why has not Amazon entered into the space? Why did eBay come into aerospace and then pull back out? Because there's got to be a facilitation of that activity because of credit elements, because of paperwork, because of Trace, all those aspects. You cannot just introduce that customer to customer and expect everything to go well. So there are some fundamental, how would you say, increases that need to be accomplished or hurdles that need to be overcame. And there's only a handful of larger players that I think that have the ability to do that, and that will be a separator in the market. Today. Today we manage other people's inventory. We provide transparency through big data. Those algorithms that we talked about or Abdul discussed, associated with historical movements and sales and demand, those will all be critical for us to understand which material we bring forward and not. The airlines, as you look today, and what is mentioned, is that over half of those airlines are owned by a leasing company. So it's not just an airline constraint associated with the surplus that we're going to see, and how do they monetize it? Before the epidemic, airlines had an inventory issue. They had a surplus issue. But because of the airlines doing so well, it became less of the core focus of information or really targets that they were focused on. That target is back today. And who has the strength and funnels and relationships in order to monetize those out there. That's going to be a fundamental key. I do worry about the smaller players in my arena today, as are they going to be able to keep up? Are they going to be advanced enough? Do they have an ERP system like SAP that costs millions of dollars to invest in? Those are the elements that are going to probably result in some consolidation in our business for the first time, as you saw airlines go through that years ago, and some fundamental changes that I think will be here for good. So just to share some highlights and some views, and all of us have some great insight to this business, and we all work together in order to kind of achieve the common goal. And we're here to support the airlines. They are fundamentally the reason why we're here today, as well as the MROs and cargo operators and OEMs. So we're just trying to discover those avenues to develop value, and I believe we're on the right path. So thank you, Chris. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Tommy. You will have the emails of the presenters today, so feel free to get in touch with them if you have any specific questions for them. So
yeah, I was running out of time, so I left. I skipped the last "We Are Global" slide. I didn't think that would be necessary.
Thanks, Tommy. Right. No, it's good, but you can people will have access to the presentation and the slides. So let's go to the questions that we have received already, and we are trying to restore the poll. So we're working on it. So the first question is from the audience: is how many parts in % of engine value will still have high demand, as new parts will not be available or will maybe more expensive, and whereas which % of parts will face significant lower value as the surplus market will be flooded by them? So what is your opinion? What % of those, what are these parts, especially in the engines, will have a higher demand than others? Maybe I will start with Abdul, if you have any comments on this.
Sure. And it depends from model to model, but it's typically the 80-20 rule. 20% of the parts are 80% of the value, and the rest are sold over time. life-limited parts, core engine parts, airfoils, nozzle guide vanes in engines, turbine material. The major rotating parts within the engine will retain their value and do well over the long period of time. But within an engine, there are parts that rarely scrap. The cases, the stators, the big components that can be repaired. So those, when you part out an engine, you sell, we categorize into 4, A, B, C, and D, and A sells quickly, B sells over 6 to 12 months, C sells from 6 to, let's say, 18 months, and everything else you become a storage company for. So on the engine side, that's how it works. On the airframe side, things like flying controls are very difficult to sell because they can be repaired, and they can be repaired relatively quickly. So those are very difficult to sell. You look at the MEL items on any specific aircraft; those are the aircraft that typically move the fastest. And then from there, things slow down. But what's difficult is that with the sheer amount of aircraft that will be parted out, the number of components, of similar components that are available is what's going to drive. It's going to be a supply-demand issue. There's going to be a lot more supply than demand. So a part that today might be very valuable and may have a lot of inventory turns may next year not move at all because just the sheer number of parts available. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdul. Tommy, from your end, any comments on this?
No, I mean, Abdul and I come to the same cloth. I had no disagreement in the 80-20 rule from that aspect of it. I do believe that different engine types will bring a different value. I mean, CFMs today, if you've got 8,000 cycle LLPs, my daughter can sell those, right? I mean, everybody's looking for that activity from a life standpoint, but there's so many variables with scrap rates associated with the engine and so on. The problem with some of those business cases is, yes, there may be a 20 to 30% kind of quick gain out of value associated with material, and the rest of it slows down. But the business cases of past, based on engine values, required you to sell that tier 2, 3, and 4 material at times in order to reach that business case. And what will that look like? Now you have an oversupply of that slower moving material, which actually affects the business case drastically. So I think there will be a lot of situations. If you look at some of the larger operators, they'll utilize that key tier 1 material, but then what is going to happen to the rest of that product? Is that going to turn into oversupply and not be able to monetize it?
Thank you, Tommy.
Yeah.
I'll go back to Abdul. What is your biggest obstacle to achieve your vision for the future?
The biggest obstacle is adoption by the entire industry. Every airline has their own sort of way of doing things. Some develop their own systems. Some use canned approaches. The adoption of a universal system. When I came in the business, and about 25 years ago, I asked my boss, why don't we have a universal barcoding system that every airline and every USM and every MRO provider uses, that we can take parts with that barcode and move it from airline to airline, from MRO to supplier to airline. And airlines are just reluctant to develop a universal system. So the system that we're developing actually allows an airline to use whatever system they use and to integrate through the code that we provide them, the data exchange through whatever barcode, QR code, or other system they use to track their inventory. That's going to be key. But global adoption is the biggest obstacle, and that will take time. But we think that once there is momentum with the key operators, then the global adoption will come relatively quickly.
Thank you, Abdul. Jonas, you've been looking at the market, you've been discussing with a number of suppliers. Do you see any further consolidation through the USM market? And I can also go to Tommy and Abdul for their views on this.
Yeah, I think so, and I think you noted that on the last slide that I had from my end, the difference in bullishness between large firms and smaller firms. I think right now it is a difficult environment for many of these players, but at the same time, airlines will recover and they will have the need for the same or even more support than before, just in a new way. So you will have to arrange on the supply side with a broad set of suppliers that either are consolidated or act in close partnerships in order to deliver a full solution to the airlines. So probably some consolidation, but also partnerships.
Thank you, Jonas. Tommy, you want to go next?
Yeah, no, I think as we look at the demand elements associated with our customers today, there's interfaces that at best that I believe we perform very well at, and there's areas that I think we could improve the support service arena if we were to at one time looked at organically building, but now today it may come through us acquiring someone or partnering with someone, you know, from that aspect in order to facilitate out kind of the service offering. And I absolutely, if you're one of the smaller, I think you'll see people or reach out and latch on to larger players who have a bigger market segment in order to survive.
Thanks, Tommy. Abdul?
You know, I on one of my slides towards the end of my operational presentation, I talked about the 4 things that will inevitably happen. The risk transfer is the main one. I'm seeing the decoupling of airlines coming to us saying that they've been on a PBH or OEM support program for the entire life of an aircraft, and they're looking to move away from that. And what solutions do we have to provide for that, which include the instant availability of the inventory that they had access through the program, to repair support, all the way through to financial flexibility. How can they not pay for this for every hour they fly, but only when they need it? Coming up with that flexibility is going to be the key, and having a balance sheet to support the airline through its needs is key. And that's why I talked about the tiering system. Not every supplier can provide that level of support to an operator, and not every supplier is motivated to. So if you take a company that has historically provided those types of services, a lot of the big Lufthansa Techniques of the world or SR Techniques of the world that provide those sort of dedicated services are going to struggle for a period of time unless they adapt to what the airlines are looking for going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Abdul. There's one last question. Airlines would want to be able to utilize a part salvaged from the part out aircraft immediately without incurring additional recertification costs. How to achieve this without compromising regulatory requirements? Abdul, you want to go first?
Sure. Look, from my perspective, every regulatory agency in the world is different. So FAA is different from CAAC, which is different from the civil aviation authorities throughout Europe and IATA in general. But an airline that has an aircraft that is airworthy on their certificate can remove a part serviceable and use that part on a different aircraft while that aircraft has a certificate of airworthiness. So an airline can essentially, that's why I say harvest, not part out, harvest the parts they need from a serviceable airplane that has been stored in accordance with the OEM's storage guidelines, tag those parts serviceable and use those parts. The transferability of that part is the question. Can another airline use that part if the airline needed it or wanted to loan or borrow? That is something that will change from civil aviation authority to civil aviation authority. But an airline can absolutely, for the most part, remove parts serviceable, put them on the shelf, and use them on a different aircraft in the future while it's on their certificate.
Thank you, Abdul. I think, Tommy, are you covered, or We have
No,
very
I agree.
short time.
I agree 100%. It's one of the value propositions that I used to enjoy, and the airlines enjoy today. They can go. We used to call Rob off of each aircraft and don't have to go through recertification process. Today, from my world, I have to go. If I take that part off, I've got to go recertify that part. So the airlines have more flexibility than we do.
Thank you so much. And thank you, both of you and Jonas, for your presentation. Let's see if we can manage with our poll now. So Geraldine, if you can show us the poll. And it's about, when do you believe that demand for travel will be back to the 2019 levels? So this is the fourth time that we are doing this poll the last few months. So we'll show you the results of today's poll and also the past results. In a second, we'll give you some time to select your answer there. It will be interesting to see what trend we have. So maybe it's time for the answers. Okay, so we have 4%, 23%, 47%, and 26%. So, this is pretty, I don't know if we can see the earlier results. So this is what we had before. So the 6 to 12 months, really it's going down. 23, the 12 to 24 months, that's also going down. So 2 to 3 years is the most popular answer here. And also the last one has increased, 3+ years has also slightly increased. So we see a shift towards the outer years, quite consistent since we started this this poll. So the expectations are more gloomy that we will recover to 2019 levels fairly later in the years. So thank you again for your participation. Let me take this opportunity of the webinar to talk about one of my favorite topics lately that has been creating a lot of issues with the industry. Abdul indicated or slightly mentioned about the incident clearance statement that we are proposing. If we can go to the next slide, please. So when you are trading USM, there has been a lot of commercial interest. There are not exactly specific standards on especially on traceability. And these commercial interests have added a lot of paperwork. And currently, or most of the industry is using what is called the non-incident statement, NIS, and is one piece that a provider, a trader, a broker may ask you for. And it states that the aircraft or the engine or the part has not been involved in an incident. An incident, according to ICAO, is even when someone had his hand, let's say his arm broken because of turbulence in an aircraft, or a flight attendant got injured in an aircraft. So that's even an incident. So we are going away from this, and we have created, along with the leasing community, so as IATA representing the airlines and the aviation working group representing the leasing community, we went to remove that and create the incident accident clearance statement, or ICS, to declare that the aircraft has been deemed acceptable for continued use. And as long as the airline had that part under their jurisdiction, under their authority, that part was cleared from any type of, it has been actually repaired according to the manual. And if we can go to the next slide. So what the non-incident statement is it adds basically unnecessary paperwork. If you talk to some of the brokers and even the airlines and others, creates tremendous paperwork. It does not add anything to the safety or the airworthiness of the aircraft, of the part. If you don't have it, there is a tremendous loss of the asset value if you cannot provide it. And in many cases, it's difficult to obtain because you don't know who had that part before. You don't keep a track of that part throughout time. So we're moving to, as I mentioned, to the incident clearance statement, the ICS. Although there is some paperwork related to it, and still we believe that it doesn't add anything to the safety. However, now there is an agreement between IATA and the AWG and the leasing community, and it is a step in the right direction, eliminating paperwork. If we can go to the next slide. So our goal is to pretty much what Abdul mentioned in his opening presentation, is to be able to trace that part back and be comfortable with using the airworthiness tag, the EASA Form 1 or Transport Canada Form 1 or the FAA's 8130, because these are the tags that ensure that the part has been through a shop, it has acquired, it went through the maintenance manual, the proper procedures to be maintained, and it's returning to service. If we do not accept that tag and we are looking for other paperwork to support this type of activities, that means we are not trusting our quality system. And it's okay not to trust a part coming from a specific shop or an airline who used that part or whoever because of your processes and your policies. However, you should trust the Form 1 and the 8130 that has been given and released with that part. The ICS statement can be found on the IATA website as indicated there. And if you have any questions, you have my email. Please come to me. If an airline does not want to provide the ICS, please let me know, and I can talk to an airline, and also the aviation working group can talk to the leasing community, as both of us represent the end users for those parts, and we can provide you all sufficient information. There are also guidance along with this on the website. And with this, thanks for your attention, and we'll continue with the next topic. Jens Bjarnason from Iceland Air, he will be presenting to us about the consumable stock optimization tool that they have created at Iceland Air using data science and AI and artificial intelligence. Thanks, Jens, for participating. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody. It's great to be here. Yeah, I just wanted to go over things that we've been working on actually for quite some time, but we're finally at this stage where we're seeing the kind of results which we think are worth sharing with the community. So the next slide, Geraldine. So what we have been going through is typically everybody has been, all the airlines or MROs are keeping an inventory of consumables I've seen over the years. We see this continuing inflation where the stock increases, the value increases, the volume increases. For us, it's been about 3% per year, assuming a stable operation. And we see a lot of cases where we order material, sometimes required urgently, sometimes required for modification campaigns, what have you. And frequently, only part of this is used. Sometimes nothing is used. And so we see this continued growth of consumable inventory. And despite this increase in size and value, this inflation, our our service level has remained stagnant about 85 to 90%, which is not very good actually. So next slide. So yes, we do have a problem, and we've been trying to address this. I came on board as an SVP Tech Ops, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, and I've been working on this, trying a lot of things. Some of the things we've done, we implemented an internal approval process to kind of add discipline to the purchasing. We've done several campaigns to reduce inventory through sales using these known channels that we have, these online channels, for example. We have tried to use the built-in utilities in the maintenance IT platforms. We used to have a system called Amigos. We're currently now using Maintenix, a Canadian system. We've tried to also have done a demonstration with Trax. And so we've tried a lot of things. We've done some internal work, some computer programming methods, but at the end of the day, nothing seemed to be working. And we sat down, we brought some experts to the table, and we really looked hard at this and said, why isn't this working? Why does the problem keep growing? Why does the inventory keep going up? Next slide. And what we came up with finally is if you see on the right hand side, that a lot of the parts in a consumable inventory has the volume of transaction, the part movements are so small that the traditional methods used for forecasting and predicting purchasing, they really break down. And this includes the built-in utilities that the major IT platforms are using. And so once we realized this, and we used some expertise, we brought in some people from the outside, some analysts and statisticians to really look hard at this, and this was the conclusion. So we kind of started from scratch. Next slide, and looked at what can be done, and we came up with this Monte Carlo solution, which is not new. It's been around since World War II, probably. Put some things down about the history of it, so you can read if you wish. But basically, what it is, it's you repeat randomly a run or simulation of parts usage, and you do this sufficiently often enough that you get a stable solution. Next slide. So what we do is, the key, of course, is the usage history, and then you add to that a predefined service level. Like I said before, our service level has been traditionally up in 85–90%, which we feel is quite low, sometimes even lower. So we for this analysis, we insist on 95% service level, meaning that when a consumable part is required, 94% of the time it is available. It's available for use. And then you of course have to know the lead time, you have to know the buying frequency, minimum order size. There are all kinds of constraints where you essentially need to do as part of this programming and part of this simulation. Next slide. So this is an example. This is some filter, a typical consumable part, and you could pick any part, but this was just taken to one example, and the red lines show the usage, one red line per day. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's two. Most of the time there's nothing. So this is a typical time series that we use as input, and this is an example of low usage material movements. And the example I'm going to go through with you is actually a real case based on this data. Next slide. And what we do, we typically have to do about these simulations. We have to do about typically 1,000 to 3,000 random tests and end up with this kind of histogram. In this case, we have a 10-day lead time for the part. So what we do is we randomly select 10 days out of the time series and add them up to estimate the usage. If you do this efficiently often enough, you start getting a statistically meaningful distribution. And in this case, we see here on the right-hand side the required service level. So if we required say a 90% service level, you can actually see here the number of items you need to have on stock, and which is about 10 in this case. And we do this for every single part. For every single part, consumable part we have on inventory, we run it through this kind of simulation. And we end up with, for each part, a purchasing forecast or prediction or suggestion, whatever you want to call it, and we follow that, and we feel, and the theory says that if we do that, we can expect, or more or less guaranteed, 95% service level. So this is what we did. Next slide. So this is just, if you look on the right, the forecast. That's the you see here that is the tool that we use. Historical data, desired service level. You can use as input things like known future events such as C-checks and A-checks, where you have some statistic about expected usage of certain consumable parts. Same goes for flight hours and cycle for line operations, for example. And this all goes into the forecasting model, which uses this statistical methods, this Monte Carlo simulations, and comes up with a purchasing suggestion. So this is really the key. And we did this initially on 200 selected part numbers, and it worked great. And now we are in the process of basically putting all our consumable stock into this model. Next slide. So just to go through through the case study, we at the beginning of the year, we took these 200 lines that I mentioned before. We had about $1 million, and based on the history and projected use, we estimated in 4 months to be able to bring this down about 25–30%. So what you're looking at now is not a real thing. This is based on computer simulation of expected usage. So if everything goes well, we should be able to reduce this stock by 30%. But keep in mind that we are also at the same time increasing the service level from about 85 to about 95%. So it looked too good to be true. I said, let's try it. Let's give it a try. Let's see what comes out. And next slide. So the actual outcome is what you see on the blue line. So for the first couple of months, we were more or less on schedule. We saw the stock rapidly going down. So within about month and a half, couple of months, we had already achieved about 20% reduction. Then in March, you actually see a spike, a sharp increase. This is actually because of COVID. These are grounding of the aircraft. Obviously, we had a lot of parts on order, which temporarily increased the stock because there was no usage. But since then, the system has actually stabilized, and we are now more or less on track. So even with the disruption due to COVID, the grounding of more or less our entire fleet. We still have seen well over 20% reduction in inventory, and we have actually maintained measurements of the service level, and we have in fact exceeded the 95% we started as our target baseline. So next slide. So just to summarize, we demonstrated about 25% reduction for all parts, especially for the this is primarily works well for the parts with low usage, but it works for the others as well. Even though some other statistical method probably capture those better, this actually works for everything. And what we have set up is essentially a cloud-based, user-friendly system that our people, the purchasing agents, are becoming quite familiar with. And now we're, as I said before, in the process of basically loading from the 200 parts we tested on the entire stock into this system. So this more or less sums up what I wanted to get across to you. I wanted to share this with you, and if anyone in the audience, be it an airline or MRO, wants to know this, we are quite keen on sharing the knowledge that we have, and even if somebody wants to collaborate and use this to run some test cases on their own inventory, whatever you want to do, just feel free to contact me, and we'll work something out. So with that, I want to thank you and give it over to you, Chris. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jens. One question about the consumable inventory for you is some of the consumables, expendables come in batches. Let's say you purchase like 100 parts, but you're only going to use 2.
Yeah, that's the minimum quantity, minimum required quantity. That's one of the constraints. But that is we have that, Chris, as part of the model. We have that for this is typically known for most of the parts. So you can actually put this constraint into the model, and we do that. And and I should mention that one of the things we also have done is this can also be used to monitor performance of vendors. Sometimes we have a contracted lead time for parts, and so we use this obviously to monitor the performance of these suppliers. If you don't have a contracted suppliers with guaranteed lead time, we simply use the statistical methods to predict the lead time. So all of this goes into the model just as constraints for the simulation.
Good. Also, one question, I think this is from my experiences. When some of the consumables, expendables are quite expensive, there's an opportunity even to repair them. So will these go back into the system? Do you do anything like this in Iceland? There we used to call them like consumables repair.
No, these we call repairables. I mean, we have rotables, we have repairables, and we have consumables. So what I've been this distinction, this classification between consumables and repairables is something that we already have in our system and have not. So this is independent of that. But you're right, Chris. I mean, this is sometimes it makes sense to repair things, sometimes it doesn't. So the classification between two is rather fluid. But what we have done so far and what I have demonstrated to you today is strictly based on what we classify as consumable.
Excellent. Okay. I don't know
Chris,
if
I could comment, quickly, as I appreciate the project and work. We do a lot of what you described as going into airlines and doing the evaluation of that process, right, today, and surplus elements. Not if you experience the same thing, but I would say that one of the #1 elements was the the best and worst day was the invention of dual bin systems associated with, expendable inventory. And what we learned from a lot of the airlines or experiences that they're backfilling to basically a fill rate instead of a usage, what you've described, and never looking at the actual demand aspect of it, but buyers, sitting there from the expendables, which doesn't require a lot of hierarchy approval, just backfilling bins, not just one bin, but dual bins, so you never have a stock out. That provided a huge amount of inventory. And when we went in, first thing you do is right size the inventory and surplus all of that inventory, and then work from there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you experience the same thing, but just to share with you what we've witnessed from multiple airlines.
Thanks. We've tried basically since 2005 when I became SVP of Tech Ops. We've gone through several iterations of, and we brought out consultants from outside, and we have changed the platforms from Amigos to Maintenix, and I think I can honestly say that now for the first time we are seeing some positive results and seeing that we managed to kind of get control of a situation which for many years, and I don't know what the other airlines out there or MROs feel about this, but the consumable inventory issue was out of hand. It kept growing and growing, and we, like I mentioned to you earlier in the presentation, we did a lot of things, and I listed up various things that we did, and so far, and it's still early, at this stage at least, I feel confident enough to share this with you, and I feel that this is something that the industry, and that includes the software developers for these huge maintenance IT platforms, they have simply not been able to come up with sufficiently advanced algorithm and sufficiently sophisticated statistical methods to do this. So hopefully this is something which will people will be able to take advantage of and use, because there's a big problem out there.
Okay, thank you, Jens, so much for your presentation. I think that was the last question for you. For lack of time, again, thank you for your presentation. And with this, we go to the.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. To the last presentation for the day. We have my colleague here, Gareth Harris, who is the product manager and business development for the MRO SmartHub. And Gareth, with this, the floor is yours. We're looking forward.
Thanks very much, Chris. Good morning, everybody. I'm Gareth Harris. I'm the product manager and business development for MRO SmartHub. Thank you for joining us this morning for this presentation on MRO SmartHub. It's IATA's unique solution for valuing aircraft spare parts. I'm going to discuss the evolution of this product today, what it can tell us about the current state of the market for USM, and how this is becoming an indispensable tool that can be used under any market conditions to generate tangible benefits for both airlines and MRO organizations. Next slide, please. MRO SmartHub was developed based on some very specific needs that were being signaled by our airline partners. There was a clear requirement to improve the level of transparency surrounding the valuation, pricing, and availability of spare parts. With a lack of available industry tools, there was really no access to a neutral source of information against which airlines could transact or benchmark. So a more systematic and holistic approach was required towards the evaluation of spare part values. A platform that could also help improve guidance on asset utilization, as well as asset value management and marketability. In short, a platform that could provide an unbiased viewpoint of valuation for airlines, MROs, and aftermarket vendors alike, as well as utilizing the power of collective data contribution to create a truly unique picture of the marketplace for USM. Next slide. IATA MRO SmartHub is a web-based business intelligence platform with two key components. Evaluator. This provides fair market value and detailed statistics for surplus parts, And Connector, this eases trading with your preferred partners through a distinct trading channel. The platform allows for quick and accurate evaluation of excess inventories and provides a transparent fair market value and true availability of surplus material. The primary benefits of utilizing the platform is to reduce material costs while maximizing the usability of your on-hand inventory. As well as allowing you to fully understand your part valuations, the platform also gives you an opportunity to purchase, sell, or exchange aircraft materials, as well as allowing you to manage your consignment inventories. The platform delivers detailed insights and statistics with respect to all materials that are listed and can provide practical intelligence with respect to sale or purchase prices, average repair costs, and TAT of parts, all based on condition. The FMV for parts is derived using a proprietary stage-based algorithm and is not simply an average of historical prices. Now more than ever, it's important to gain insights into how the market for USM is evolving, and MRO SmartHub has been able to do this right through the recent and ongoing market turbulence by continuing to receive data contributions from our subscribers. This enables us to provide the most up-to-date insights possible as we track the full impact of COVID on our marketplace. MRO SmartHub operates based on a community approach that requires data contribution from all subscribers. Everyone benefits from this data collectively, whilst IATA operates as a neutral safe harbor to anonymize and protect the information on behalf of the community. Next slide. The evaluated database covers a time period that runs from January 2018 to September 2020 and contains around 1.15 million endpoint transactions covering 175,000 part numbers. Those endpoint transactions are the final results of purchases, sales, and repairs that are provided by our subscribers. There are over 1 million FMVs listed in the parts catalog. The platform covers more than 100 aircraft types and engine models, and we also have a broad coverage for all standard material types and part conditions. All this data is held securely and confidentially by IATA for the benefit of the MRO SmartHub community. All data is fully anonymized so that only the provider of those transactions can identify their own data points versus that of the rest of the community. Next slide. The Connector platform has almost 30,000 unique part numbers listed and valued at approximately $200 million. Once again, we have a broad coverage of material types and conditions which are available to buy, sell, or exchange depending on the trading relationships that are established on the platform. Next slide. So what of MRO costs and the global COVID impact? Well, MRO costs represent about 11% overall of an airline's overall costs. And that is probably about the third highest cost percentage of any after those are listed there in terms of fuel and also headcount. So it's a significant contributor towards an airline's cost. Those maintenance, repair, and overhaul costs were estimated to be worth originally forecast as $91.2 billion for 2020, but as we all know, that's taken a substantial hit, and total demand for MRO maintenance, repair, and overhaul is expected to come in at somewhere around the $50 billion mark for 2020. Spending on all parts and materials, which is a subset of that spend, is around $26 billion. And the forecast for USM will be $2.8 billion in 2020, which is down from $4.7 billion in 2019, a 40% reduction year on year in the spend on USM. As flying and material spend return, we expect USM demand to grow significantly by 68% per year throughout 2022, when the market can be expected to reach about $7.9 billion. Next slide, please. We've seen an increase in aircraft retirements, and that has a dramatic impact on the availability of USM. Before COVID, there was certainly a shortage of both aircraft feedstock and the supply of USM. The impact of COVID will see an increased rate of aircraft retirement and teardown during this time, and retirement projections will increase through 2028. So used serviceable material and green-time engines are estimated to flood the market for popular legacy types, depressing the pricing on those spares. The impacts to the availability of USM and spare parts on the market are yet to be felt, but downward pressure is being felt on prices of used components and parts for popular types, as well as increases in the availability of spare engines. Next slide. And so what can MRO SmartHub tell us about the activity in the marketplace during this COVID crisis? We've seen a reduction of 90% in overall spare part transaction volume. And the COVID-19 pandemic hit the spare parts market as early as January 2020. The figure shows the volume of spare parts transactions, that's purchases and sales, from January 2019 until June 2020. In January 2020, the transaction volume reduced by 70% compared to the previous year. And after a short period of stabilization, the volume reduced by a total of 90% compared to January 2019 in April and May 2020. The significant impact in January 2020 is related to the cancellation of transactions in the first weeks of the COVID pandemic in March, as transactions had not yet been completely processed for many airlines and MROs. And they were cancelling non-essential transactions to reduce expenses at short notice. Next slide. So what of price volatility and how have prices been reacting during this turbulent time? The chart you can see compares price levels for the first 6 months of 2019 to 2020. In 2019, we saw a maximum change in price level of around plus or minus 20%, whereas in 2020, there were variations of plus or minus 60%. After initial increase in March 2020, probably caused by the annual changes to contracts and price levels, and the fact that only essential parts have been traded to continue operations, the figure decreased, indicates a decrease in the overall price level until June 2020. This trend shows clearly that almost all operations were suspended during this time, and the cash flow situation became increasingly critical for airlines and MROs. As operations restarted in June 2020, the demand for parts slightly increased. However, as airlines and MROs are still facing high cost pressure, only essential demands are fulfilled, which leads to similar behavior to the beginning of 2020. Price level volatility increases. Further analysis is available within the MRO SmartHub that covers the impacts based on condition types as well as product line breakdown. And this goes all the way down to the part number level within the platform, where you can fully analyze the individual market impacts on spares. Next slide. So what are the future of the USM market? I think we've heard a lot about that today. But what we do know is that USM will play a significant role in the industry recovery. There is significant pricing volatility as supply increases and demand is reduced. We're certainly seeing the evidence of that within MRO SmartHub and the data we're seeing there. Despite the large availability of aircraft for teardown, both reduced flying and MRO activity has caused demand for USM to fall dramatically in the short term. But as the industry restarts, airlines will be focused on lower material costs, and USM will become an increasingly acceptable, lower cost alternative to new OEM parts. The key concern for buyers and sellers will be to determine which USM inventory to acquire and at what price. Determining the FMV, the fair market value, and securing reliable access to USM will be critical activities. And demand for USM is expected to be very strong in the medium term. And as one commentator described it, there will be a tsunami of demand on its way in the coming 12 to 24 months for USM. Next slide, please. So I think from this, what we can gather as well is that the need for FMV intelligence directly linked to actual market transactions has never been stronger. IATA MRO SmartHub offers unique market insights based on an algorithmic approach to developing fair market values for aircraft spare parts. The community-driven data contribution enriches the overall insights by providing benchmarking data for your organization. All transactional data contributions are anonymized and secure. Only subscribers can view their data points versus the marketplace. IATA MRO SmartHub can provide granular intelligence at the part number level based on material condition. Next slide, please. To register for a demonstration and to take advantage of our offer of free access to the platform during the COVID crisis, please visit the website listed location on the screen. We have a specific campaign that's linked to COVID and helping airlines and MRO organizations during this challenging time. You can also subscribe to the platform, through our dedicated website to receive further updates about the platform. And we'll be expanding on much of what you've heard today through a white paper, which will be available very soon. And this will draw on further insights detailing the full impacts of COVID. Full material evaluations and detailed part statistics are also available only on IATA MRO SmartHub. So if you have any further questions about the platform, you can contact us directly using the details listed below. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gareth. And one question for you that came from the audience is if you can elaborate a bit on what is the methodology that SmartHub is using to determine the FMV, the fair market value. What are the elements that go in and how they are used to determine the fair market value? What are the inputs that
I mean, the inputs are those transactional data points that we described that customers and clients are providing to us on the end state sales, purchases and repairs. Those are taken together and using a stage-based approach. We evaluate the quality of the FMV that's being generated. I can't go into any technical details about how that's produced because it's a proprietary approach to developing it, but it does provide for a degree of confidence in the outputs that are generated based on the amount and quality of the data that's being input to generate that FMV. So people can assess the degree to which they want to rely on the information that's there in terms of its quality. So we have a rating that we put on a degree of confidence level, shall we say, that goes with each and every FMV that's produced by the system.
And
Chris, may I ask a question of Gareth?
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead, Abdul.
Does the system differentiate between the quality of the repair and the traceability of a part? So, for example, a part repaired by an OEM versus a small mom and pop shop, a part traced to what OEMs call a harsh environment versus let's say a US or European carrier. Those are critical towards the evaluation of quality and reliability to an airline. Does this system take those into account?
The repair data that's contained within the platform is average repair cost, and the FMV is built ostensibly on purchase and sale transactions. So it is done slightly differently. And it's all based on condition of parts as well. So it doesn't assess between the quality of a particular repair. It really just takes into account the condition of the particular part in question and how much it was either bought or sold for in the marketplace at that particular time. Repair costings obviously vary greatly, and which is another reason why we only establish average repair costs inside the platform. Not all repairs are created necessarily equal, and obviously require a different work scope for each type of repair. So, but I mean, there's an opportunity certainly for parts that are being purchased and sold to provide the certification that goes with those particular items. The quality of the repair itself, that's really down to the certificate that's being issued, and the source for that. I know there's some black magic that goes into that somewhat, but we have to take those transactions on their face value based on the condition and the certs that are being issued at the time.
Understood. Thank you.
One other question from the audience, Gareth, is how is the price volatility measured if the demand of specific material varies, which is not necessarily, that material is not necessarily comparative. So how do you measure the price volatility into this?
The price for, what was that word? Sorry, I didn't quite catch it. The price.
How is the price volatility? You showed the slide with the price volatility. How is
the
it
volatility,
measured?
yeah.
Yes, if demand for specific material varies, and that material is not always necessarily comparative. I think you have like for engines, for components. How do you measure the price volatility? What is your
So it was based on it was indexed versus 2019, and you know, perhaps the overall chart that I showed was a little too high level for this type of discussion. But I think what we can find is that we have significant differences between material types and conditions within the platform itself, and we have more detailed approaches to evaluating that volatility to provide more insights at that kind of granular level, which I think is probably more interesting in the most part, because that's really what people want to understand. They want to understand how components are different from engine parts, and how those differ from consumables in terms of what's going on in the marketplace. And again, it's backward looking in the sense that it's based on transactions that have already happened, but those transactions are happening in the current marketplace, so they are a reflection of what's truly happening for those individual parts. I think the high-level numbers show that in general there's volatility, but I think we can provide some statistics on the platform where you really have to dig down a little bit to understand what that actually means. But it was really done based on a year-over-year baseline comparison in terms of the movement of those prices based on condition of part.
Okay, thank you. One question that it will address some of the previous panelists, that it's as we saw from many graphs and many reports in the industry, airlines have retiring, or they are parking a lot of aircraft. They have their own inventories. They are reducing their fleets. Do you think, and it was mentioned that the demand for part outs will start 12 months, let's say, from now. Is that realistic, or you see that being further away? I don't know if Gareth is something for you, or maybe it's for Abdul, or yeah, you want to take a shot?
Yeah, sure. I mean, from my perspective, I think the smart money is going to wait this out, because in order to generate a market for USM, you need some raw material to deal with, and I think it really depends, top and bottom, what the airline, or how much the airlines are prepared to let their airframes go for in this current environment, and there's going to be a game of chicken going on, I think, between the suppliers and the users of those airframes. I think that will really determine it. It's needs must for the airline in terms of liquidity, and that may lead to a dramatic fall in the cost of those airframes. So again, that will really determine how the USM market plays out for many of those spares.
Tommy, any?
Yeah, no, I mean, we are seeing part out activity. It's just very strategic from that aspect of it. And as where we saw influx of pricing of assets over the last few years, because there was capital investment and a lot of people wanting to get into the USM arena. Today, the discussions is which partner do I select that can monetize my asset? So as we're tearing down an A330 currently for a customer, it's not based on an acquisition, it's based on a consignment to VAS. So there's some dynamic changes. I think you'll see more of that, you know, in alignment with some of the larger players based on retired fleets. But there is, and you'll see there are wide bodies that are being positioned to tear down, that they know are not coming back into space. And then there's, of course, the large subset of aircraft that haven't been decided upon yet, and everybody taking different positions on aircraft. But through this process in COVID, we've still acquired assets, engines and aircraft.
Okay, I think, thank you so much. I think we are coming to the end of this final episode, the last session. And I would like to thank all of you, the panelists today, and all the previous presenters in this series. Thank you so much for being with us, for being part of it. I wanted to remind the audience that the emails of all the presenters are available to you. They will be available with the presentation later on. So please, if you have any specific questions, I would highly recommend that you address it directly with them and you get in touch with them for any further questions or any further explanations. I would like also to take the opportunity to thank Geraldine, who has been with us in all the series and behind helping to set up and present the webinars, and also our colleague Daniel Cantor, who has been very active supporting us from a legal perspective at IATA. So thanks again. We hope to see you more in a realistic environment somewhere around the world. Hopefully you will be available to be there and be in a face-to-face rather than a virtual webinar. And I appreciate again your attendance today, and the presentations will be available soon. Thanks again. Have a great day, a great night, or a great start of the day for those of you in the Americas area. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.